If things keep going like this, America will effectively go bankrupt, and all tax revenues will be used just to pay the interest on the national debt, leaving nothing left for anything else. Elon Musk is now sounding the next warnings. After he paused and reconciled with Donald Trump, he's back at it again, ringing the alarm bell. In addition, we now have a Bloomberg analyst saying this will trigger the largest release of capital in US and Bitcoin history. So, unlock it if this event happens. We'll take a closer look at exactly what she means here. Brazil is on the verge of establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. We have 7 days left until the strategic Bitcoin reserve in Texas must be signed in the US at the latest. And things are looking very positive right now because we have a Bitcoiner leading the way. So, the governor still needs to sign it. And overall, Bitcoin is developing very well here. Once again, we're seeing more very positive developments, and the Bitcoin price is reflecting that as well. Go ahead and hit the like button below if you want to see a new all-time high soon. If you want the Bitcoin price to reach new record levels, and if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit the subscribe button now. David Bailey also has something to say here. When I told you that you're not bullish enough, it's because there are massive events coming our way, and we need to take a look at them. The first thing that's happening here is that the next Bitcoin treasury company has absolutely skyrocketed. Here is Age 100 Group, in which Adam Beck is also invested. The first Bitcoin treasury company in Sweden is now up 72% in a single day. And David Bailey also writes here, if you think these Bitcoin treasury companies are already taking off, just wait until Bitcoin hits $150,000. Then we see these parabolic explosions. For example, Smart Web Company is up 55% in a single day. Honestly, it's not even shocking anymore when we see these kinds of massive price increases. This has basically become the new normal. These treasury companies are just exploding. Of course, not every single one, but many of them. And we'll get to the US and Elon Musk in a moment, because what's happening there is absolutely incredible. But first, just really quickly, now we have Texas, with its strategic Bitcoin reserve, which will go through in at most 7 days, or probably just 6 days by the time you see this, with the time difference and all. So, in 6 days, it will be finalized. We have a governor here who also seems to be pro-Bitcoin, and he has to sign it, and now he has 6 days left to do so. I even think that if he doesn't sign it, it automatically becomes law. So, these are actually really good signs here. Then, over in Brazil, we have the committee that has now approved a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and you can see here, Brazil on the brink of creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Let's listen in for a moment.
To pick Brazil is to allocate 5% of national reserves to Bitcoin. And they said the country is edging closer to make history as a proposal that would allow up to 5% of the country's $370 billion in international reserves to be held in Bitcoin. This should move the market, all things being equal.
This should move the market, all things being equal. So I'm telling you, Brazil is on the verge of making history. They want to put up to 5% of their reserves, 300 billion or whatever they have, 5% of that, into Bitcoin. That's not an insignificant amount. 5% of 300 billion is already a hefty chunk that could flow into Bitcoin. She says this could move the markets, and so on. Yeah, let's wait and see. Of course, that's positive and all, but by now we're really at a point where even news like this, Brazil, Bitcoin reserves, and so on, doesn't move the markets in a super crazy way anymore. But obviously, these are positive things and so on. And yeah, now let's take a direct look at. Oh right, there was a second story, which is also really wild. Of course, Brazil also wants to introduce a bill to abolish capital gains tax on Bitcoin. That's something I always mention, which could also happen in the US, and would make Bitcoin truly become real money if capital gains taxes are abolished, so that Bitcoin is no longer taxed, even when you make small transactions. And now let's take a look at Elon Musk, and later also at the Bloomberg Analyst, who actually says, hey, this is going to unleash the biggest wave of capital into Bitcoin. But first, of course, Elon Musk, who has repeatedly issued warnings in the past, and who has loudly criticized things like, oh, Donald Trump with the big beautiful bill, and how terrible all of this is, and so on. He has now stopped bashing Donald Trump and also stopped criticizing the big beautiful bill. But now he's raising the next set of alarm bells and is making it very clear. Just like I said at the beginning, if things keep going this way, America will effectively go bankrupt, and all tax revenue will be used just to pay interest on the national debt, leaving nothing left for anything else. And now he's responding to a post. So let's take a look at what this post is reporting. Here we see, how did we get to a point in this country where 25% of all tax revenue is used just to pay the interest on $37 trillion in national debt? That means every year in the US, The total revenue of the US government is about $5 trillion. The interest payments on US government debt are about $1.2 trillion, and government spending is around $7 trillion. And you can also see this in the chart here. Here you can clearly see the national debt and how the debt ceiling keeps getting raised to keep up. So we don't have a fixed debt limit here. You can see the red line here, and you can see that the red line keeps getting adjusted further and further and further. That means the US takes on debt. Then there are debates again. Okay, how high should we set the debt ceiling now? And then we raise the debt ceiling again and again, higher and higher and higher. And that was actually Donald Trump's proposal, to simply say, okay, we keep raising it anyway. So Donald Trump just says, okay, let's just get rid of the debt ceiling altogether. And if you look here, you can see that at the beginning, this was a relatively slow curve. It didn't rise so steeply back then. And only here, starting around here. Yeah, 2020 was of course another really big jump, which shot up during the coronavirus pandemic. But in general, you also have to say that 1971 was obviously a crucial turning point as well. If you were to go even further back here, you would see that debt growth was even flatter back then. And it was only after 1971, when the gold standard was abolished, the so-called Nixon shock, that it started to rise more and more steeply, but especially in recent years, it has become increasingly exponential. And that's exactly what Elon Musk is talking about, that in the next 3 or 4 years, we'll see as many new interest payments added as we previously accumulated over something like 20 years. And that inevitably leads to the point where the US will be spending as much on interest payments as it brings in through government revenue. And then, of course, the US won't go bankrupt because they can just print their own money, but they'd have to print so much that the currency would probably go into hyperinflation, which would basically be the same as a national bankruptcy. And it's like ringing the alarm bell over and over again, but they just don't get it. I mean, they just keep throwing even more money out there. Donald Trump wants to blow even more money with his big, beautiful bill, but apparently now Elon Musk isn't even allowed to criticize that directly. I also wonder why Elon Musk doesn't just put 2 and 2 together or simply turn to Bitcoin. Honestly, that's a mystery to me, but feel free to write your thoughts in the comments below. Why doesn't Elon Musk get it and turn to Bitcoin? Now he wants to start a new party, and who knows what else he wants to do, and that's all well and good, but the solution here is Bitcoin. You can't keep fixing this broken, crumbling system, and we can see it. What are the politicians doing? They just want to take on more debt, they want to escalate even further, and things aren't any better with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump wants to escalate things just the same. And Donald Trump wants to come out of this as the winner, as the cool guy. Yeah, I'm the one who pumped up the stock markets, who pumped up Bitcoin, who's just the cool boss here and so on. And right now, the reality is that saving just isn't in style. What's in right now is going all out, really going wild with the money printing press. And now let's actually listen in to the interview with Eric Balchunas, who also says, of course, okay, hey, if we have these crazy debt excesses, then obviously we need hard money. And what's about to happen here will be the biggest unlocking of capital ever, meaning that money will be freed up for Bitcoin ETFs. So this is going to give Bitcoin ETFs another massive boost. We're already seeing that Bitcoin ETFs are a huge success story. Of course, the dollar isn't. The dollar keeps heading closer and closer to zero, while Bitcoin keeps going up, and this will be a massive catalyst. Let's listen in for a moment. It's wirehouses, such as Morgan, Stanley, Merrill Lynch, and so on. And these platforms will lead to massive inflows. Now, let's listen to this part. Attention.
What do you think? Yeah, the biggest bull case for the ETFs has been the unlocking of RAs in 2025. And that's something I was talking about 6-7 months ago, even. Oh, there's I think about it as there's more than 3 tiers, but I think about 3 tiers, almost like red, yellow, green. Red light is, I don't care what you're doing. On our platform, you cannot touch a Bitcoin ETF or any of these ETFs. Then a lot of ETFs are in this middle ground where it's if the client specifically asks to buy a Bitcoin ETF, you can do it for them. Or if you clients certain levels of wealth and risk ability to take risks and desire to take risks, they have a certain amount of assets with us, then you can buy the Bitcoin ETFs for them. And this is called listed versus unsolicited. So if you come to me, I'm your RA, you ask for it, then I can do it. But I can't be I think you should put 2% of your portfolio in Bitcoin. The final level is when it's solicited, and I can basically solicit to you and say, I think you should put this in your portfolio. Right now, the vast majority of the assets are in that middle ground. Or actually, a lot of them are still red.
And the vast majority is independent RIAs versus wirehouse because...
So you have to understand what he's talking about here. He's talking about the biggest capital inflow. By the way, we'll get to that later. He actually mentions it again in the quote. He's talking here about IRAs, that is, individual retirement accounts, a tax-advantaged retirement savings account in the US, similar to private pension insurance in Europe, but more flexible and very popular for tax reasons. And he's talking about 3 different classes that you can get through all the wirehouses. So what do you have here? Merrill Lynch, JP Morgan, and so on. And right. And he says there are 3 different classes here. There's, well, let's say it's kind of like a traffic light system. Red means you're not allowed to invest in those ETFs at all. Then there's orange, which means you can invest a little. And then there's the green light, where you're allowed to invest fully. And he says that this is going to switch, that more and more ETFs will basically be included in these IRAs and get the green light, so that huge amounts of capital can be poured into the Bitcoin ETFs. And in his view, that's a massive draw for capital, because then a large part of retirement savings will take place in Bitcoin. And now he goes a bit further into it. Attention, here comes the big statement where he says this will be historic.
To those assets. Yeah, it comes back. So the independent RIAs, the ones you were just talking about, they were the early adopters. The Bitcoin ETFs came out. They don't have to wait for a due diligence team of like a bunch of people sitting in New York where you're wasted to figure out whether you can buy this. Usually it can take 2 to 3 years before an ETF gets approved. You're an independent RIA. You can just buy for your clients what you think is viable as long as you can defend it for whatever you're doing. So the early adopters. But again, there's still trillions of dollars of assets in those wirehouses, in those wealth platforms you were talking about that are either at the red or yellow level. And we're seeing an unlocking of more people going up that ladder towards allowing things to be approved for buying of the end investors. And I think that's the biggest unlocking potential for the Bitcoin ETFs. And we've seen a lot of flows come in these ETFs. And I think when we get the 13F report from June 30th, which we'll get in August, we'll see a lot more RIAs that have come online and buying this for their clients.
So what he's saying now is really massive. He says, of course, there were individual IRAs, so basically individual retirement accounts and so on. And they've already invested a lot of capital into this, but all the wirehouses that could still transfer funds over, like JP Morgan, Merrill Lynch, and so on, they still have a lot of capital sitting in the background, and there aren't many of them yet who have the green light. Once they get the green light, they'll move even larger amounts of capital into Bitcoin. And he also says that the 13F filings are going to be very, very interesting when they're released in August. They're always published with a few months delay, and institutional players and large companies are required to disclose who invested and how. And they also have to specify how much was invested in Bitcoin. I don't know from what size exactly, maybe from 500 million or so. You have to report, I think. And then from the 13F filings, we can always see, okay, who has bought Bitcoin again? Which major investment platforms have now bought more Bitcoin ETFs, and so on. And he simply says that this will be the big catalyst that a lot of people just don't have on their radar. And so both parts come together here. On one side, of course, the USA, which has debt problems, and on the other side, Bitcoin as a solution. And obviously, if the US heads into a debt collapse, even more people will use Bitcoin in their IRAs as retirement savings. And additionally, if it becomes even easier and gets the green light, then even more people will jump in. And that's why here's my big recommendation. If you still want to buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link below to 21 Bitcoin. Here you can easily buy Bitcoin now. Just use the code Bitcoin Hotel. With this code, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. It's an absolute recommendation. Definitely check it out, guys. See you. Peace out.